Ruth McAllister's fist hit the wooden door until her knuckles split open. Blood smeared across the painted wood, but she kept pounding. Behind her, 3 children pressed together in the August heat, watching their mother beg. The door didn't open. "Please, Frank," her voice cracked. "He was your brother. These are his children." Silence. Then footsteps moving away inside. That's when Ruth understood. Family meant nothing when it cost something. Welcome to a story of survival, impossible choices, and the stranger who saw what blood refused to see. Stay with me until the end. Subscribe and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this journey reaches. The letter had promised everything. Ruth pulled it from her pocket for the 100th time, though she knew every word by heart. Her husband's handwriting, shaky from the fever that would kill him 3 weeks later. "If anything happens to me, go to Frank. He's not warm, but he's fair. He'll see you right, Ruth. He'll see our children right." Daniel had believed it enough to die peaceful, thinking his family would be safe. Daniel had been wrong about a lot of things. The gold strike that never came. The mining camp that took his lungs. The brother who now stood on the other side of a locked door, while his nephews wilted in the Montana heat. "Mama," Jacob's voice, her eldest at 10 years old, already carrying a man's weight in his eyes. "He's not coming back." Ruth folded the letter carefully, tucked it against her chest, where the dust couldn't reach it. The last thing Daniel ever gave her. The last promise that had just shattered on a doorstep in Helena, Montana. "I know." She turned to face her children. "We're going to be fine." The lie tasted like ash. They had traveled 400 miles to reach this moment. 400 miles of trains and wagons and walking when the money ran out. 400 miles of Ruth rationing every bite so the children would have enough. Now they stood on the main street of a town that didn't want them. And Ruth had exactly $12 in her pocket. $12. 3 children. August in Montana. The sun beating down like it was trying to punish them for existing. "I'm thirsty, Mama." Elijah, her middle boy at 7, pressed against her skirts. "Can we get water somewhere?" Sarah, her youngest at 5, said nothing. Sarah hadn't spoken a single word since the morning they found Daniel dead in his bed. 3 months of silence from a child who used to sing before breakfast. Ruth looked down the street. A general store with a water barrel out front. A boarding house with a no vacancy sign that might as well have said, "No hope." A saloon with men spilling out onto the boardwalk, watching her with eyes that made her skin crawl. "Soon, sweetheart. Let me think." But thinking required hope, and hope was getting harder to find. She'd tried the boarding house first, before Frank. The woman behind the counter had looked at Ruth's worn dress, her 3 children, the dust of travel still coating their shoes. "Full up." "I can pay. I have money." "Full up." The woman's eyes had slid away. "Try the church." The church was locked. The minister gone until Sunday, according to a note pinned to the door. 4 days away. 4 days might as well be 4 years when your children were dehydrated and the sky was promising nothing but more heat. So Ruth had gone to Frank, her last hope, her husband's own blood. And Frank had spoken through the door without even opening it. Daniel's mistakes died with him. "You're not my problem." Mistakes. 3 beautiful children, and Frank called them mistakes. Ruth had wanted to scream, to pound until her hands broke, to make him see what he was doing, what he was leaving them to face. But she'd learned something in the mining camps. Screaming never changed anything. Only action mattered. Only moving forward. So she'd gathered her children and walked away with her spine straight and her heart cracking into pieces.
"Mama, that man's watching us."
Ruth followed Elijah's pointing finger across the street. A figure stood in the shadows of the land office, motionless as the building itself. She couldn't see his face, only his outline. Tall, broad, still in a way that suggested he'd been watching for a while. Ruth's hand tightened on Sarah's shoulder. In the mining camps, watching men meant danger. Men who watched and calculated and waited for women alone. "Stay close to me." She kept her voice steady. "All of you." But there was nowhere to go. That was the terrible mathematics of their situation. The street stretched in both directions, and every door on it had already closed. The watching man moved. He stepped off the boardwalk and crossed the street with an easy stride, like a man who owned the ground he walked on. As he passed through the light, Ruth got her first real look at him. 45, maybe older. Face like weathered leather. Lines around eyes that had squinted into too many suns and too many sorrows. Dark hair going gray at the temples. A jaw that hadn't seen a razor in days. Hands scarred from work, thick with calluses. He wasn't handsome. He was something else. Solid. Present. The kind of man who looked like he could stop a stampede by standing in front of it. "Evening, ma'am." His voice was gravel, smoothed by water. Quiet enough that Ruth had to lean forward to hear it. "Heat's bad today. You folks got water?" "We're managing." The words came out automatic. The defensive wall she'd built over months of mining camp survival. Something shifted in the man's expression. Not offense. Recognition. "Respectfully, ma'am, you're not." He looked at the children, then back at her. "Boarding house is full, if they told you that. Church is locked. And whoever's behind that door you were knocking on ain't coming out." Ruth's breath caught. He'd seen. He'd been watching long enough to see her beg at Frank's door. "What business is it of yours?" "None." Simple. Honest. "But that sun's gonna cook you before nightfall. And I've got a ranch 20 miles northeast, with good water, a working kitchen, and beds enough for your children." Every instinct screamed warnings. Strange men offering isolated ranches, her children's safety dependent on a stranger's goodwill. But competing against those warnings was simple arithmetic. 3 children. Rising heat. No alternatives. "What do you want in exchange?" The question came out hard, demanding. Ruth watched his face for the flinch, for the calculation, for the flicker of something dark beneath the surface. Instead, something tired crossed his features. Like he'd expected the question and found it depressing anyway. "Nothing tonight. You'd be doing me a favor, actually." He paused. "Ranch has been short-handed since my foreman moved on. Empty buildings deteriorate faster than occupied ones. And tomorrow? Tomorrow, if you're interested, we can talk about work. I need someone to teach the ranch children their letters. Someone who can read and write." "I can read and write." "I figured." He almost smiled. "Woman who carries a letter in her pocket and reads it like it's scripture usually can." He'd noticed that too. Ruth wasn't sure whether to be impressed or afraid. "I'm Ezekiel Thornton. Folks call me Zeke." He gestured vaguely into the distance. "Broken Arrow Ranch. The offer stands until you accept, or that heat kills you. Your choice." Ruth studied him. Studied the lines in his face, the patience in his stance, the complete absence of pressure in his voice. Most men trying to manipulate would have been earnest, full of pledges they had no intention of keeping. Zeke Thornton just sounded tired and practical. "Jacob," she kept her voice steady, "get your brother and sister." The wagon ride passed in near silence. Zeke had filled canteens before they left, handed them to the children without comment. Jacob drank carefully, rationing by instinct. Elijah gulped until Ruth took the canteen away. Sarah held hers, but didn't drink, just pressed the cool metal against her cheek. Ruth sat on the bench beside Zeke, maintaining careful distance, watching the prairie stretch endlessly beyond the reach of the wagon's shadow. "Your husband passed?" Zeke asked after the first mile, his voice pitched low. "6 months ago. Mining accident in California. And you traveled all this way for family that wouldn't open a door." It wasn't a question. Ruth answered anyway. "My husband's brother. He said he'd help." "Frank McAllister." Still not a question. "You know him?" "Know of him. Man's got a reputation for being exactly what you found today." Ruth felt something loosen in her chest. The simple acknowledgement, free of pity or advice. "How did you know we were family?" "You were standing outside the general store with 3 children, $12, and no plan." Zeke shifted the reins slightly. "That's not calculating. That's everything just fell apart." He glanced at her briefly. "And the way you were watching the street. You weren't looking for help. You were calculating survival." Ruth turned to look at him directly for the first time. "Why help us?" The question hung in the hot air between them. 14 years ago, I needed help I didn't know how to ask for." His voice went rough. "Someone offered it anyway. Didn't make a thing of it. Just did what needed doing." He paused. "Figure I owe that forward." He glanced at her. "Also, wasn't lying about the ranch needing work. And I do need a teacher." Another pause. "But mostly, couldn't ride past 3 children about to spend a bad night in a worse place and pretend I didn't see it." The ranch appeared gradually. Fence lines first, then outbuildings, then the main house. Solid and well kept, smoke rising from a chimney even in the summer heat. Someone was cooking. Zeke guided the wagon past the main house to a smaller cabin set back among cottonwood trees. "Foreman's cabin." He climbed down. "Give me a minute to get water hauled in." He disappeared inside while Ruth helped the children down from the wagon. They stood in a small cluster, Sarah clinging to Ruth's skirts, all of them too tired and overwhelmed to do more than wait. Through the open door, she could see Zeke moving efficiently, lighting lamps, checking the pump, opening windows to let the breeze through. "All right," he reappeared in the doorway. "Pump works. Water's cold from the well. Kitchen's got supplies enough for supper." The cabin was simple but solid. One main room with a cooking area, a separate small bedroom, everything clean and bare. Zeke had already pulled quilts from a chest and laid them across 2 narrow beds. "Children can take the bedroom. You can have the main room." He met her eyes directly. "There's a bolt on the inside of the door." Ruth nodded, trying to process the swift change in their circumstances. 6 hours ago, they'd been standing outside Frank's door. Now they had shelter, water, the promise of food. "Mrs. Hattie Mae Johnson runs the main house," Zeke continued. "She'll come by first thing with breakfast. She'll knock loud." "Mr. Thornton." "Zeke." "I don't know how to." "You don't need to thank me tonight. Get your children fed. Get them rested." He moved toward the door, then paused. "You're safe here, Mrs. McAllister. Whatever you're worried about, you're safe. This is a working ranch with good people on it. Nobody's going to bother you or your children." After he left, Ruth stood in the center of the cabin, listening to the sounds of evening settling over the ranch. Behind her, Jacob had already claimed the bedroom, his voice soft with wonder at having a real bed. Elijah had found the pump and was working the handle, watching water flow with something like joy. Only Sarah remained at Ruth's side, her small hand wrapped tight in her mother's skirts, her eyes tracking the open door where Zeke had disappeared. "Mama!" Jacob appeared at her elbow, worry creasing his young face. "Are we staying here?" Ruth put her hand on her son's shoulder. The bones were too sharp. Evidence of too many meals stretched too thin. "I don't know yet, sweetheart, but we're safe tonight. That's enough for now." But even as she said it, Ruth wondered, what did Ezekiel Thornton really want? Why would a stranger offer so much to people who had nothing to give? In her experience, kindness always came with a price. She just hadn't learned yet what this one would cost.
Morning arrived with 3 sharp knocks and a woman's brisk voice.
Mrs. McAllister? I'm Hattie Mae Johnson. Got breakfast here, and it's getting cold.
Ruth, who'd been awake since first light, hurried to open the door. The woman on the porch was perhaps 60, built solid with steel gray hair pulled into a no-nonsense bun. Her skin was dark as good coffee, her eyes sharp enough to cut glass. She assessed everything in a single sweep.
Children still sleeping?
She didn't wait for an answer, just pushed past with a covered basket that smelled of bacon and fresh biscuits.
Good. Let them rest. You and I need to talk.
She set the basket on the small table, began unpacking with efficient movements. Plates, napkins, a jar of honey, a pot of coffee still steaming.
Sit.
It was a command. Ruth sat. Hattie Mae poured 2 cups of coffee, pushed one across the table, and settled into the opposite chair with the air of someone prepared to conduct an interrogation. Zeke told me your situation. Husband dead. Brother-in-law's a bastard, pardon my language. 3 children and $12 between you and the poorhouse. Her eyes were sharp. That about cover it? Yes. Good. I appreciate a woman who doesn't waste time on pride when facts need sorting. Hattie Mae sipped her coffee. Here's what you need to know about Ezekiel Thornton. He's fair, he's honest, and he's got a tendency to help people who can't find help anywhere else. She paused. But he ain't running a charity, and he won't respect you if you try to play helpless. You want to stay here? You work. I understand. Can you cook? Yes. Clean, mend, manage a household? I've done all of those. Hattie Mae nodded slowly. Zeke mentioned you can read and write. That true, or was he being hopeful? I taught school for 4 years before I married. Something like satisfaction crossed the older woman's features. Well, that changes things considerably. She leaned forward. We've got 6 ranch families with children. Youngest is 4, oldest is 12. They need teaching, and the nearest school is in Helena. Too far for daily travel, especially in this heat. You could teach them here, 3 days a week. Zeke would pay fair wages. Ruth felt her heart accelerate. He's offering me a job? I'm offering you a job. Zeke will agree because it solves a problem he's been working on for 2 years. Hattie Mae's voice sharpened. But understand this. It ain't charity. You'll work for your wages. You'll teach those children proper. And you'll contribute in other ways too. Helping with meals, mending, whatever needs doing. She stood. In exchange, you and your children get this cabin, wages enough to save, and a place in this community. If you want it. But you earn it. Clear? Clear. Ruth met her eyes directly. And yes, I want the work. Good. Hattie Mae gathered her things. Zeke will be back around noon to discuss particulars. Until then, settle in. Get your bearings. She paused at the door. One more thing, Mrs. McAllister. Whatever you're thinking about why Zeke helped you, whatever worst case you're running in your head, stop. Ruth waited. He lost his wife and baby 14 years ago. Childbirth fever. He blamed himself for not getting the doctor fast enough. Been alone ever since. Building this ranch. Helping people because he couldn't save the one person who mattered. Her voice softened slightly. He ain't looking for anything from you except honest work and basic decency. That's more than fair. Don't make it complicated. After she left, Ruth sat alone in the warming cabin, listening to her children begin to stir in the bedroom. Through the window, she could see the ranch spreading out in morning light. Pastures, outbuildings, the solid presence of the main house. Not charity. Work. Wages. Dignity.
For the first time since Daniel died, Ruth felt something other than the grinding necessity of survival. She felt possibility. But even possibility came with questions. Why had Ezekiel Thornton really helped them? What had he seen when he watched her from across the street? And what would happen when he discovered that Ruth McAllister was keeping secrets of her own? Daniel hadn't died in a mining accident. Daniel had been murdered. And somewhere out there, the men who killed him might still be looking for what he'd found. The answers would come. They always did. Ruth just hoped she was strong enough to face them when they arrived. Zeke returned just after noon, riding a bay gelding that looked as practical and well-kept as everything else on the ranch. Ruth watched him through the window, noting the way he moved. Efficient, unhurried, a man who had learned that patience accomplished more than speed. He knocked once before entering, removing his hat as he stepped inside. "Mrs. Johnson said you talked."
We did.
"And you're interested in the teaching position?"
Yes.
Ruth had prepared words about gratitude and commitment, but Zeke's directness made them seem unnecessary. "All right, here's what I'm thinking." He remained standing, hat in his hands. 3 days a week teaching, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. 8 until 2 with a break for lunch. Reading, writing, arithmetic, whatever else you think they need. I provide supplies. Wages are $30 a month. $30. In the mining camps, Ruth had struggled to make 10 last a month. "In addition," Zeke continued, "you help Mrs. Johnson with household tasks on your non-teaching days. Cooking, mending, general work. That's another 15 a month. So 45 total, plus this cabin at no cost, plus provisions from the ranch stores. $45 a month. Ruth did the mathematics automatically. In 6 months, she could save enough to have real choices. In a year, she could be independent. There's one more thing. Something shifted in Zeke's tone. Your boy Jacob, he's 10?
Yes.
Old enough to work if he wants to. Not hard labor, light ranch work. Helping with chickens, collecting eggs, feeding stock. He paused. I pay him $5 a month, same as I pay the other boys who help around here. Ruth felt her throat tighten. He was offering Jacob dignity, a chance to contribute instead of just being another mouth to feed. He'd like that. Her voice came out rough. Thank you. It ain't charity. Zeke met her eyes. I need the help, and he'll earn every penny. But I want you to know your children are welcome here. All of them. They can attend your school when you start teaching. They can play with the other children. They can just be children for a while. He moved toward the door. Mrs. Johnson will help you set up for teaching. First class starts Monday. Gives you a few days to prepare. Mr. Thornton. He paused. Why? Ruth needed to understand. You don't know me. You don't know if I can actually teach, if I'm trustworthy, if I'll stay or disappear with whatever I can carry. Why take this risk? Zeke was quiet for a moment, his dark eyes unreadable. Because 14 years ago, someone took a risk on me when I had nothing to offer but my word. And I've spent every day since then trying to be worth that trust. He put his hat back on. You've got the same look in your eyes that I had back then. Like you're one bad break from losing everything. But you're not going to let that stop you from fighting. He opened the door. Monday morning, 8 o'clock. Don't be late. After he left, Ruth stood in the center of the cabin, processing everything. The wages, the opportunity. The strange, quiet man who offered help without asking for anything except honest work in return. Mama? Ezra appeared in the bedroom doorway. Was that Mr. Thornton? Yes. What did he want? Ruth looked at her son, this serious boy who had carried too much responsibility for too long. He offered me a job teaching school, and he offered you a job too, if you want it, working on the ranch. Jacob's eyes widened. A real job? With real pay? $5 a month. $5? He said it like it was a fortune. To him, it probably was. Mama, can I? Please? Ruth pulled him close, feeling his thin arms wrap around her waist. Yes, sweetheart, you can. She didn't tell him about the weight that lifted from her chest.
Didn't tell him that for the first time in 6 months, she could imagine a future that wasn't just survival.
Some things a mother kept to herself, and some secrets, like the truth about his father's death, would have to wait a little longer, until Ruth figured out who she could trust. And until she was certain that the men who killed Daniel McAllister weren't still hunting for what he'd died to protect. The first week passed in a blur of preparation and adjustment. Hattie Mae proved to be exactly what she'd appeared: efficient, fair, and utterly intolerant of laziness or self-pity. She put Ruth to work immediately, teaching her the rhythms of the ranch household, the preferences of the hands who took meals in the main house, the particular requirements of Zeke's quiet, ordered life. Man likes his coffee strong, his meals on time, and his house peaceful, Hattie Mae explained as they worked together in the kitchen. He ain't fussy, but he appreciates things done right.
And he notices when they ain't. Ruth learned quickly. She learned that the ranch ran on a precise schedule: breakfast at dawn, dinner at noon, supper at sunset. She learned the names and faces of the ranch hands: Thomas One-Arm Garrett, the graying foreman who'd lost his left arm at Gettysburg; Caleb and Samuel Rivers, brothers from Oklahoma who handled the cattle; a rotating crew of seasonal workers who came and went with the weather. She learned that Zeke took his meals with the hands most days, sitting at the long table in the kitchen, listening more than he talked. And she learned that Broken Arrow Ranch was more than just a cattle operation. It was a community. The families Hattie Mae had mentioned lived in small houses scattered across the property. The Hendersons with 3 children, the Cartwrights with 4, the Dawsons with 2, all of them employees, all of them dependent on the ranch's success, all of them treating Zeke with a respect that seemed earned rather than demanded. On Friday, 3 days before her first teaching session, Ruth walked to each family's home to introduce herself and assess the children's current education. What she found was both encouraging and challenging. Bright children, eager to learn, but wildly varied in their abilities. The oldest Henderson boy could read at a 7th grade level. The youngest, Cartwright, couldn't recognize letters. "You've got your work cut out for you," Mrs. Henderson said with a sympathetic smile. "But we're grateful for the opportunity. These children need proper education if they're going to have choices in life." That evening, Ruth sat at the small table in her cabin, working by lamplight to create a teaching plan. Jacob sat across from her, practicing his own letters. His father had taught him to read, but his writing needed work. Elijah was already asleep, worn out from a day spent exploring the ranch under Thomas's tolerant supervision. And Sarah sat in the corner, holding the rag doll Ruth had made her last Christmas. Not playing with it, just holding it, staring at nothing. 3 months of silence. Ruth had tried everything: gentle coaxing, firm demands, pretending nothing was wrong, acknowledging everything was wrong. Nothing worked. The doctor in California had said it was shock, that Sarah had seen something the morning Daniel died, something that had locked her voice away. Ruth didn't know what Sarah had seen. She was afraid to find out. A knock at the door startled her. She opened it to find Zeke standing in the evening darkness, a wooden crate in his arms. "Books," he said simply. "For the school. Mrs. Johnson mentioned you'd need them."
He set the crate inside, and Ruth knelt beside it, examining the contents with wonder. McGuffey readers, arithmetic primers,
A worn copy of Robinson Crusoe, geography texts, even a small globe, its surface faded, but intact.
Where did these come from? Zeke shrugged. Been collecting them for a few years, thinking eventually we'd get a teacher out here. Some I bought, some I traded for. He paused. Use whatever helps. Ruth lifted the geography text, feeling its weight, its promise. This is generous, more than generous. It's practical, but his voice carried warmth beneath the dismissal. Can't run a ranch forever on men who can't read or calculate. Investment in the children is investment in the ranch's future. He moved toward the door, then paused. You settling in all right? Boys doing okay? We're doing well. Better than I expected. His eyes moved past her to where Sarah sat motionless in the corner. The little one. She don't talk? Ruth's chest tightened. Not since her father died. Zeke was quiet for a long moment.
My wife used to say that sometimes the heart knows things the mouth can't speak.
Said you just gotta wait until the words find their way out. He put his hat back on. She'll talk when she's ready. Don't push her. After he left, Ruth sat with the book spread around her, Jacob watching with sleepy curiosity. Mama, he asked, is Mr. Thornton, is he a good man? Ruth thought about the question, about everything she'd observed in the past week, about the way Zeke treated his workers, his careful distance, his quiet generosity. I think so, sweetheart. I think he might be one of the best men I've ever met. Better than Pa? The question hit harder than Ruth expected. She looked at her son, at the uncertainty in his eyes, and chose her words carefully. Different than Pa. Your father loved us with everything he had, but he was always looking for something better, something more. She paused. Mr. Thornton seems like he's already found what he wants. He just stays, builds,
Keeps his promises. Jacob nodded slowly, something settling in his young face. I like that. I like people who stay. Monday morning arrived, with Ruth's nerves stretched tight as piano wire. By 8 o'clock, 9 children sat before her in the converted storage shed, ranging in age from 4 to 12. Their faces showed varying degrees of interest and apprehension. Good morning. Ruth stood before them, feeling the weight of responsibility. My name is Mrs. McAllister, and I'm going to be your teacher. Some of you are already good readers. Some of you are just learning your letters. That's all right. We're going to work together, help each other, and by winter, every one of you will know how to read, write, and calculate. The oldest Henderson boy, Daniel, 12 years old and already showing his father's stubborn jaw, raised his hand. Yes, Daniel. My pa says you came from California. Says you got 3 children and no husband. Says, Mister. Thornton took you in when your own family wouldn't. The other children watched with interest, waiting to see how she'd respond. Ruth met Daniel's eyes directly. That's all true. My husband died in a mining accident. I came here hoping family would help, and they wouldn't. Mr. Thornton offered me shelter and honest work. Everything I have here, I'm earning, just like your parents earn what they have. She paused. Any other questions about my personal life, or can we start learning? Daniel's cheeks flushed, but he shook his head. Good. Now, Daniel, since you're the oldest, come up here and read from this primer. Show me what you know. The morning passed quickly, consumed by assessment and organization. By lunch, Ruth had a clear picture of each child's abilities and a plan for grouping them effectively. After the children left, she sat alone in the quiet classroom, feeling the particular exhaustion and satisfaction that came from hard work done well.
How'd it go?
Zeke appeared in the doorway, his presence filling the small space. "Well, I think. They're good children, eager to learn. Daniel Henderson give you trouble?" He asked direct questions. I gave direct answers. We understood each other. Something like approval crossed Zeke's features. That's the way to handle it. These kids respect honesty. Try to soft soap them, and they'll eat you alive. He paused. "You need anything? Supplies? Different arrangements?" "No. You and Mrs. Johnson have provided everything I need." "All right, then." He turned to leave, then stopped. "Ruth?" The use of her first name registered. "You did good today. The parents are already talking about how organized you are, how you treated their children with respect. That matters out here." "Thank you, Zeke." After he left, Ruth sat in the empty classroom, processing the day. 1 week ago, she'd been standing outside Frank's door, holding $12 and 3 frightened children. Now she had a home, wages, work that mattered, and most surprisingly, the respect of people who had no reason to give it beyond what she earned. For the first time since Daniel died, she felt something other than grief when she thought of him. She felt gratitude for the love they'd shared, for the children he'd given her, even for the letter that had brought her here. Maybe this was what second chances looked like. Not dramatic rescue, but quiet opportunity. Not salvation, but simple fairness from someone who understood that most people just needed a chance to prove what they could do. The weeks settled into rhythm. Teaching consumed Ruth's mornings 3 days a week. Household work filled the gaps, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, the ranch began to feel like home. Jacob had taken to ranch work with an enthusiasm that made Ruth's heart ache. Thomas had claimed him as a sort of apprentice, teaching him to handle chickens, muck stalls, carry water. The $5 Zeke paid him each month went into a tin can under his bed, counted and recounted with the seriousness of a banker. "Saving for something?" Ruth asked one evening. "In case." Jacob's answer was simple, devastating. In case this ended, in case they had to run again, in case safety proved temporary, as it always had before. Ruth didn't tell him to stop saving. She just worked harder to prove they wouldn't need to run. By the 3rd week, the children had made remarkable progress. Even the youngest Cartwright could recognize letters and sound out simple words. Daniel Henderson was reading at a level that would challenge students twice his age. And all of them had learned something perhaps more valuable than academics. They'd learned to help each other. "You've built something good here," Hattie Mae said one afternoon as they worked together in the kitchen. "Those children don't just learn from you, they trust you." Ruth shaped bread dough with practiced hands. "I just treat them like I'd want someone to treat my children." "That's rarer than you think." Hattie Mae slid loaves into the oven. "Most teachers come from back east with fancy ideas about civilization and improvement. They look at ranch children like they're something to be fixed. These children aren't broken. They're just learning in a different context." "Exactly." Hattie Mae's sharp eyes held approval. "Zeke said you'd understand that. Said you had the sense to see what was in front of you, instead of what you expected to see." The mention of Zeke made Ruth pause. Over the weeks, she'd become aware of his presence in ways that concerned her. He was everywhere on the ranch, checking fence lines, working with the hands, managing endless details. But he also appeared at odd moments. In the classroom doorway with more supplies, at the cabin with firewood he'd split himself. In the kitchen, eating meals while the hands talked around him. He watched her. She'd noticed. Not in any threatening way, but with careful attention, making sure she was managing, making sure the children were settling. "Zeke has been good to us," Ruth said carefully. "More than fair." "Zeke is a good man." Hattie Mae's voice carried absolute certainty.
But he's also a lonely one, though he'd never admit it. This ranch is his life. Has been for 16 years. But a ranch ain't company, and work ain't comfort. Before Ruth could respond, the kitchen door opened and Zeke himself appeared, stamping dust from his boots. "Getting bad out there," he said without preamble. "Dust storm coming in hard. Mrs. Johnson, you should stay in the guest room tonight rather than try for your cabin. Ruth, you and the children are fine where you are, but don't try to come to the main house until it clears."
The children,
Ruth said immediately.
they can't walk home in this.
Already handled. Kids are staying in the bunkhouse tonight. Thomas is telling them stories and feeding them supper. Relief washed through Ruth.
Thank you.
Zeke shrugged, brushing dust from his hat. Just practical. Can't have children choking on dust. But his eyes met hers with something that had nothing to do with practicality. And Ruth felt something shift in her chest. A recognition she wasn't ready to examine. The dust storm lasted 2 days, burying the ranch under a blanket of brown haze. Ruth and her children stayed in their cabin, safe and sound, while outside, the world turned thick and wild. On the second afternoon, when the wind finally died and weak sunlight broke through, a knock came at the door. Zeke stood on the porch, dust clinging to his coat, his bandana still tied around his nose and mouth. "Wanted to check on you. Make sure you had everything you needed."
We're fine. The cabin kept us safe.
He hesitated.
And Ruth understood why. In 4 weeks, he'd never entered her cabin beyond the doorway. Always maintained that careful distance between employer and employee.
Just for coffee, she said quietly, to wash out the dust.
He came in, moving carefully in the small space. The children were in the bedroom, playing some game involving Jacob's precious saved coins. Ruth poured coffee, handed him a cup.
You didn't have to walk all this way.
Wanted to make sure you were managing. He wrapped his hands around the cup. They were raw from work, the knuckles cracked from the dry air. Storm like that, things can go wrong fast.
We're managing. More than managing. She paused. Zeke, I need to ask you something.
Ask.
Are you satisfied with my work? With the teaching, the household help? Because if there's anything,
You're doing fine. The answer came immediately. Better than fine. The children are learning. The parents are happy. Mrs. Johnson says you work harder than anyone she's known. He studied her face. Why are you asking? Ruth traced the rim of her cup, trying to articulate the fear that had been building, despite all evidence to the contrary. Because this has been good. Too good, maybe. And I keep waiting for the moment it falls apart. When you decide we're more trouble than we're worth. Stop. Zeke's voice was gentle but firm. Listen to me. You ain't trouble. You've earned every penny I've paid you, and more. Your children are good children who work hard and don't cause problems. He set down his cup, met her eyes directly. I don't know what kind of promises men made you before, what kind of security you lost when your husband died. But I'm telling you plain. As long as you want to be here, as long as you do the work, you have a place on this ranch. That ain't charity, that's business. He paused. And it's also the truth. Ruth felt her throat tighten with emotion she couldn't name.
Thank you for saying that.
I always mean what I say. He stood, reaching for his hat. Storm's cleared enough. I should check the other families. After he left, Ruth sat alone with her cooling coffee, processing the conversation. The promise he'd made. The way his presence seemed to fill spaces even after he'd gone. Hattie Mae's words echoed in her mind. He's a good man, but he's also a lonely one. She thought about Daniel, about the love they'd shared that had been real but never easy.
Daniel had been restless, always chasing the next opportunity, the next promise of prosperity that never materialized. She'd loved him, but she'd never felt safe with him, not truly. Safety required more than love. It required steadiness, reliability, the kind of solid presence that didn't shift with circumstances. The kind of presence Zeke Thornton embodied in every action, every word, every quiet promise kept.
It was dangerous, she realized, to compare a dead husband to a living employer. Dangerous and unfair to both men. But the comparison came anyway, unbidden and insistent. And Ruth wasn't sure what to do about the feelings that came with it. September brought cooler mornings, but also something else. Trouble. Ruth first noticed it when she went to town for supplies. Helena had always been unwelcoming, but now the unwelcome had teeth. "Mrs. McAllister." Ruth turned to find a man blocking her path outside the general store. He was perhaps 35, handsome in a sharp-edged way, with pale eyes that seemed to see sin everywhere they looked. His collar marked him as clergy. "I don't believe we've met," Ruth said carefully. "Reverend Josiah Whitmore. I'm the new minister here in Helena." His voice was smooth, concerned. "I've heard about your situation, living at Broken Arrow Ranch, teaching the children there." He shook his head slowly. "It must be difficult. A woman alone, dependent on the charity of a single man." "It's not charity. I work for my wages, same as any employee." Of course. But his smile didn't reach his eyes. "Still, you must understand how it appears. A young widow, 3 children, living on the property of an unmarried man." He stepped closer. "People talk, Mrs. McAllister, and talk can be damaging." Ruth felt ice form in her stomach. "What exactly are you suggesting, Reverend?" "Only that perhaps alternative arrangements might be more appropriate. There are respectable families in town who might take you in. As a housekeeper, perhaps. Somewhere your reputation could be better protected." Ruth looked at this man, this stranger who presumed to judge her situation without knowing anything about it. "My reputation is my own concern, Reverend, and my current arrangement is perfectly respectable. Mr. Thornton has been nothing but honorable." "I'm sure that's true." Whitmore's smile turned pitying. "But honor isn't always enough to silence wagging tongues. Think about it, Mrs. McAllister. For your children's sake, if not your own." He moved away before she could respond, leaving Ruth standing on the boardwalk with her children clustered around her and a cold knot of dread forming in her chest. She knew how this worked. She'd seen it in the mining camps. One person with authority starting whispers, whispers becoming rumors, rumors becoming certainty. And suddenly, a woman's reputation was destroyed, her livelihood threatened, her children's futures damaged, all because someone decided that propriety mattered more than truth. "Mama," Jacob tugged her hand. "What did that man want?" Ruth forced a smile. "Nothing important, sweetheart. Let's go home." But it was important. She knew that even as she said it, and she knew that Reverend Whitmore wasn't finished. The first sign came a week later. Mrs. Henderson, one of the ranch families, mentioned that a friend from town had asked pointed questions about Ruth's living situation. Then Mr. Cartwright reported similar inquiries at the general store. By the end of September, Ruth could feel the shift. People in town who'd been friendly now looked at her sideways. Conversation stopped when she entered the general store, and the whispers, she couldn't hear them, but she could feel them like cold water down her spine. Hattie Mae noticed. Of course she did. "Whitmore's been busy," the older woman said grimly one morning, "spreading his version of Christian concern all over town, making sure everyone knows about the widow living in sin at Broken Arrow Ranch." "There's no sin involved." Ruth's voice was tight.
Zeke has been completely proper.
Don't matter to people like Whitmore. Truth ain't the point. Control is the point.
Hattie Mae's jaw set hard.
Does Zeke know?
No, I haven't told him.
Why not? Ruth was quiet for a moment. Because if he knows, he might feel obligated to do something about it. And I don't want him to feel obligated. I don't want him to...
She stopped. You don't want him to offer something out of duty instead of choice. Ruth met Hattie Mae's knowing eyes.
Is it that obvious?
Child, it's been obvious for weeks, to everyone except apparently you and Zeke, who are both too stubborn to admit what's plain as day. Before Ruth could respond, the kitchen door crashed open. Zeke stood in the doorway, his expression darker than Ruth had ever seen. Someone want to tell me why Reverend Whitmore just rode out here to express his concerns about moral standards on my ranch? Ruth felt her stomach drop. Zeke's eyes found hers. He suggested I should find you employment elsewhere, for everyone's reputation. His jaw tightened. Said several upstanding families in town would take you in.
What did you tell him?
I told him that what happens on my ranch is none of his damn business. That you're my employee and a fine teacher, and that if he had evidence of actual wrongdoing, he should present it. And if he didn't, he should stop spreading lies. He moved closer, his voice dropping. I told him that the next time he showed up on my property questioning my honor or yours, I'd escort him off at gunpoint. Ruth stared at him. You threatened a minister? I stated a fact. But something in his expression shifted, a crack in the wall he usually kept so carefully maintained. Ruth, why didn't you tell me this was happening? Because I thought I could handle it. Because I didn't want to make trouble. You ain't trouble. The words came out rough, almost angry. How many times do I have to say it? You ain't trouble. You're... He stopped himself, turned away, ran a hand through his hair. You're important, he finished quietly. To this ranch. To those children. To... Another stop. I won't let some self-righteous fool destroy what you've built here because he's decided appearances matter more than reality. Hattie Mae had quietly slipped out of the kitchen, leaving them alone. Ruth took a breath. Zeke, what Whitmore is suggesting about us, it's nonsense. Is it? The question hung in the air between them. Zeke turned back to face her, his dark eyes unreadable. What are you asking me? Ruth felt her heart pounding, but she'd spent too long being careful, being afraid. I'm asking if there's any truth to what he's implying. Not the sin part, I know there isn't, but the rest of it, the feelings he's assuming exist. Zeke was very still. And if there were? Then maybe we should talk about it, instead of pretending it isn't there. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Ruth could hear the clock ticking on the wall, could hear her own pulse in her ears, could feel the weight of everything that had led to this moment, every kindness, every careful distance, every look that lasted a second too long. Not here, Zeke said finally. Not like this, with Whitmore's poison in the air. He stepped closer. If we're going to talk about that, it should be on our terms, not because some minister forced our hand. Ruth nodded slowly. All right. But Ruth, he stepped closer still, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. Whatever happens with Whitmore, whatever gossip spreads, you're staying. You and your children. I'll fight the whole damn town if I have to. But you ain't leaving because some fool decided to make your life difficult. He held her gaze for a moment longer, something raw and unguarded in his expression. Then he turned and walked out, leaving Ruth standing in the kitchen with her heart racing and her world fundamentally shifted. Whatever they'd been pretending didn't exist, couldn't be pretended away anymore. And Ruth wasn't sure if that terrified her or thrilled her. Maybe both. But beneath all of it, another fear lurked. One she hadn't told anyone about. Because that night, sorting through Daniel's old letters, she'd found something hidden in the lining of his trunk. A ledger, full of names and numbers that made no sense, and a note in Daniel's handwriting. If anything happens to me, this is why. The Morrison Mining Company is stealing from everyone. I have proof, but they know I have it. Keep the children safe, Ruth, and trust no one. Daniel hadn't died in an accident. Daniel had been murdered. And somewhere out there, the men who killed him might still be looking for what he'd found. Ruth pressed her hand against the pocket where she now kept that note. Zeke had promised to protect her from a minister's gossip, but could he protect her from something far worse? Ruth couldn't sleep that night. She lay in the darkness of the cabin, listening to her children breathe in the next room, and turned Daniel's note over and over in her mind. The Morrison Mining Company is stealing from everyone. I have proof. Trust no one. But Daniel was dead, and she was alone. And the ledger hidden beneath the floorboards of this cabin might be the thing that got her children killed. She had to tell someone. She had to tell Zeke. But what if telling him put him in danger too? What if the men who killed Daniel came looking and found not just her, but everyone on this ranch? Ruth pressed her fist against her mouth to keep from crying out. She'd thought coming to Montana would mean safety. She'd thought Frank would help. She'd thought wrong about everything. Just like Daniel had. Morning came too soon. Ruth moved through her routine like a woman walking underwater. Coffee, breakfast, getting the children ready. Pretending everything was fine when nothing was fine.
Mama, you look tired, Jacob said, watching her with those two old eyes. I didn't sleep well. Because of what that preacher man said? Ruth's hand stilled on the bread she was slicing. What do you know about that? I heard the ranch hands talking. They said Reverend Whitmore is trying to make trouble for you and Mr. Thornton. Jacob's jaw set in a way that reminded her painfully of Daniel. They said he's a liar. Jacob, is he going to make us leave? The fear in her son's voice cut through Ruth's exhaustion like a blade. She knelt down, took his face in her hands. No one is making us leave. Mr. Thornton promised, and he keeps his promises. Pa promised too, Jacob whispered. He promised he'd come home. Ruth's heart cracked. I know, sweetheart. I know. She pulled him close, feeling his thin body tremble against hers. But Mr. Thornton is different. He doesn't make promises he can't keep. Even as she said it, Ruth wondered if it was true. Could anyone really promise safety in a world this cruel? The answer came sooner than she expected. Ruth was walking to the schoolhouse when she saw the rider. A stranger, coming fast down the road from Helena. Something about the way he sat his horse made Ruth's blood run cold. Too straight, too watchful, like a man used to hunting other men. She stopped walking. The rider saw her, changed direction, came straight toward her. Mrs. McAllister? His voice was smooth, pleasant, but his eyes were empty. Who's asking? Name's Garrett Cole. He tipped his hat without dismounting. I work for the Morrison Mining Company. We're looking into some irregularities in our California operation. Ruth's heart stopped. I don't know anything about any mining company. That's so. Cole smiled, and it didn't reach his eyes. Because our records show your husband Daniel worked for us, right up until his unfortunate accident. My husband is dead. Yes, ma'am. Real tragedy. Cole leaned forward in his saddle. Thing is, some company property went missing around the same time. Documents. Ledgers. The kind of thing a man might hide if he was planning to cause trouble. Ruth forced her voice to stay steady.
I don't know anything about any missing property. My husband died and I buried him. That's all." "Maybe so." Cole's eyes swept over her, over the schoolhouse behind her, over the ranch spreading out in all directions. "Nice place you've got here. Safe. Quiet." He smiled again. "Shame if something happened to disturb that peace." He touched his hat. "I'll be in Helena for a few days. If you happen to remember anything about that missing property, you can find me at the boarding house. Think about it, Mrs. McAllister. Think real hard." He rode away. Ruth stood frozen, watching him go, her whole body shaking. They'd found her. After 6 months and 400 miles, they'd found her, and now everyone she cared about was in danger. She didn't go to the schoolhouse. She went straight to the main house, straight to Zeke's office, pushed through the door without knocking. Zeke looked up from his desk, startled. "Ruth, what's wrong?" "I have to tell you something." Her voice was shaking. "I should have told you before. I should have—" "Slow down." Zeke was on his feet, moving toward her. "Sit. Breathe. Then tell me." "There's no time." Ruth grabbed his arm. "A man just came, from the mining company, the one Daniel worked for. They're looking for something Daniel had, something he hid." Zeke's expression sharpened. "What kind of something?" "A ledger. Proof that the company was stealing. From the miners, from investors, from everyone." Ruth's words tumbled out. "Daniel found it. He was going to report them, and they—" She stopped, swallowed hard. "They killed him, Zeke. It wasn't an accident. They murdered my husband because of what he knew." Zeke was very still. "And this ledger, do you have it?" Ruth nodded, unable to speak. "Where?" "Hidden, in the cabin, under the floorboards." Zeke's jaw tightened. "Does anyone else know?" "No. I only found it a few days ago, hidden in Daniel's things. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know who to trust." "But you're telling me now." "Because that man, Cole, he threatened me, threatened the ranch, and I can't—" Ruth's voice broke. "I can't let my secrets hurt you, hurt the people here. You've given us everything, and I've been lying to you from the start." Zeke took her shoulders, held her steady. "You weren't lying. You were surviving. There's a difference." "Is there?" "Yes." His voice was firm. "A lie is meant to deceive. What you did was meant to protect your children. I understand that. Any parent would." Ruth looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. "What do we do?" "We protect each other." Zeke's grip tightened on her shoulders. "That's what we do." He released her, moved to the door. "Thomas!" he shouted. "Get in here! Now!" Thomas appeared within moments, his one good arm wiping grease from his hand. "Boss? We've got trouble coming. Man named Garrett Cole, works for some mining outfit in California. He's in Helena, asking questions about Mrs. McAllister." Thomas's eyes went hard. "What kind of questions?" "The kind that comes with threats." Zeke turned back to Ruth. "This man, did he say when he'd be back?" "He said he'd be in Helena for a few days, that I should think about what he asked." "Then we've got a few days to prepare." Thomas stepped forward. "Prepare for what, exactly?" Zeke met his foreman's eyes. "For whatever comes. I want men watching the roads. Anyone comes onto this property without good reason, I want to know about it." "And if this Cole fellow decides to push things?" Zeke's voice went flat. "Then we push back." The next 2 days were the longest of Ruth's life. She taught her classes, helped in the kitchen, kept her children close, and waited for Garrett Cole to return, waited for everything to fall apart. Zeke had doubled the patrols, put men at the property lines, told the families to stay close to their homes. He hadn't told them why. "Less they know, the safer they are," he'd said. If Cole asks questions in town, no one can tell him what they don't know. It made sense, but it also meant Ruth was carrying the weight of this secret almost alone. Almost. Because Hattie Mae knew. "Zeke told me," the older woman said on the second morning, finding Ruth alone in the kitchen, "about your husband, about what really happened." Ruth's hands stilled on the dough she was kneading. "Are you angry?" "Angry?" Hattie Mae snorted. "Child, I spent the first 40 years of my life being owned by men who killed people for less than what your husband did."
You think I'm going to judge a woman for protecting her children from murderers? Ruth's eyes filled with tears.
"I didn't know what else to do."
You did what any mother would do. You ran. You hid. You survived. Hattie Mae put her hand over Ruth's. "And now you've got people willing to fight for you. That ain't nothing, Ruth. That's everything."
"But what if they get hurt? What if—"
"What if you stop borrowing trouble?" Hattie Mae's voice sharpened. "Zeke knows what he's doing. He survived a war, built this ranch from nothing. He ain't gonna let some company thug destroy what he's made."
"This is different. These men, they don't fight fair. They killed Daniel in broad daylight and made it look like an accident."
"Then we don't fight fair either." Ruth looked at the older woman.
"What do you mean?"
Hattie Mae's smile was cold. "I mean that ledger your husband died for? It ain't just evidence of stealing. It's leverage. And leverage, used right, can bring down men a lot more powerful than Garrett Cole." The idea took root in Ruth's mind. She'd been thinking of the ledger as a burden, a death sentence, something that had to be hidden or destroyed. But what if it was a weapon instead? That night, after the children were asleep, Ruth retrieved the ledger from its hiding place. She spread it open on the table, studied the columns of numbers, the names, the dates. Daniel had been thorough. Every theft documented, every bribe recorded, names of company officials, amounts paid to local lawmen to look the other way. This wasn't just proof of stealing. This was proof of murder. Because there, near the back of the ledger, was a list of names. Men who had died in accidents at the Morrison mines. Men who had asked too many questions. Men who had threatened to talk. Daniel's name wasn't on the list, but it would have been, if he'd lived long enough. Ruth's hands shook as she turned the pages. 23 names, 23 men murdered, and the company had paid local officials to rule each death an accident. This ledger could destroy the Morrison Mining Company. No wonder they were willing to kill for it. A knock at the door made Ruth slam the ledger shut. "Who is it?" "Zeke." She let him in, heart pounding. His eyes went immediately to the ledger on the table. "That it?" "Yes." He moved closer. Didn't touch it, just looked. "May I?" Ruth nodded. Zeke opened the ledger, read in silence. His jaw tightened with every page. When he reached the list of names, he stopped. "Lord Almighty!" 23 men, Ruth whispered. 23. And they killed Daniel because he was about to be 24. Zeke closed the ledger. "This changes things." "How?" "This ain't just about protecting you anymore." His voice was hard. "This is evidence of murder. Real murder. Documented and witnessed. If this gets to the right people, territorial marshals, federal authorities, the men who did this will hang. But if it gets to the wrong people, then we're all dead." Zeke met her eyes. "I know the stakes, Ruth. But I also know that men like this don't stop. You give them that ledger, they'll kill you anyway, to make sure you can't talk. So what do? We make copies, send them to people we trust, people in different places, so no one raid can destroy all the evidence." He paused. "And then we wait for Cole to make his move." "And when he does?"
Zeke's smile was cold. We make sure it's his last. Ruth didn't sleep that night either. She lay in the darkness, thinking about Daniel, about the choice he'd made, the choice that had gotten him killed. He'd tried to do the right thing, and he'd died for it. Was she about to make the same mistake? But then she thought about Jacob, about Elijah, about Sarah, who still hadn't spoken a word in 6 months. If she gave Cole that ledger, if she let the Morrison Company win, what kind of world would her children grow up in? A world where murderers walked free, where justice could be bought, where courage was punished and cowardice rewarded. Daniel had died trying to change that world. Ruth would be damned if she let his death mean nothing. Morning brought unexpected visitors. Ruth was in the schoolhouse, setting up for lessons, when the door opened. She looked up, expecting Zeke. Instead, she found Frank McAllister. Her brother-in-law stood in the doorway, hat in his hands, looking smaller somehow than he had that terrible day when he'd refused to open his door. Ruth. Frank. She didn't move, didn't stand. What are you doing here? I came to... He stopped, shifted his weight. I heard about what's happening. With the mining company. With Garrett Cole. Ruth's blood went cold. How did you hear about that? Cole came to see me, yesterday. Frank's voice was tight. Asked if I knew anything about Daniel's papers. Asked where you were living. And what did you tell him? Nothing. Frank stepped into the schoolhouse. I told him nothing, Ruth. I swear. Why should I believe you? You turned us away when we needed help. You closed your door while your brother's children starved. I know. Frank's voice cracked. I know what I did, and I'll carry that shame for the rest of my life. But Ruth, I didn't know. I didn't know Daniel had been murdered. I thought... He stopped. You thought what? I thought he'd gotten himself into trouble again, like he always did, chasing schemes that never worked out. Frank's hands twisted his hat. I thought if I took you in, I'd be cleaning up another one of his messes. And I was tired of it. Tired of being the responsible one while he chased dreams. So you left his children to die. I left them to find another way. I told myself you'd figure something out. You always did. Frank's eyes glistened. I didn't know you had nowhere else to go. I didn't know. You didn't want to know. Ruth's voice was flat. That's the truth, Frank. You didn't ask. You didn't check. You just closed your door and went back to your comfortable life. Yes. The word came out like a confession. Yes, I did. And I've hated myself for it every day since. He took another step toward her. But I'm here now. Cole is dangerous, Ruth. He's killed before, and he won't stop until he gets what he wants. I know that. Then let me help, please. Frank's voice was desperate. Let me make this right. I can go to the territorial marshal. I can... You can leave. The voice came from behind Frank. Zeke stood in the doorway, his eyes cold. Mr. Thornton, Frank started. I said leave. Zeke stepped into the schoolhouse. You had your chance to help Ruth and her children. You chose to close your door. You don't get to play hero now just because you feel guilty. This isn't about feeling guilty. Cole is. I know exactly what Cole is. Zeke moved to stand beside Ruth. And I know exactly what you are. A coward who abandoned his brother's family when they needed him most. Frank flinched like he'd been struck. I'm trying to help. Then help from a distance. Go back to Helena. Keep your head down. And if Cole asks about Ruth again, you tell him nothing. And if he threatens me? Zeke's smile was cold. Then I suggest you find some courage, because it's about time you did. Frank looked from Zeke to Ruth. Something shifted in his expression. Shame, regret, and beneath it, the faintest spark of determination. "I'll go to the territorial marshal," he said quietly. "I'll tell them everything Cole told me, about the company, the questions, the threats." "Why would you do that?" "Because Daniel was my brother." Frank's voice steadied. "And whatever else I am, I'm not a man who lets murderers walk free." He turned and walked out.
Ruth watched him go, not sure what to feel. "Do you trust him?" Zeke asked. "No," Ruth shook her head. "But I think he might actually help. Guilt can be a powerful motivator. So can fear, and Cole is good at creating fear. Then we need to be better at fighting it." Zeke looked at her. Something warm flickered in his dark eyes. "You've changed, Ruth. From the woman I found outside that general store. I had to. That woman was surviving. I'm done just surviving. What are you doing now?" Ruth met his eyes. "Fighting back." The attack came 2 nights later. Ruth woke to the smell of smoke. She was on her feet before she was fully conscious, running to the window, her heart slamming against her ribs. Fire. The barn was on fire. "Jacob! Elijah! Sarah!" She was screaming as she ran to the bedroom. "Wake up! We have to go!" The children stumbled out, confused and frightened. "Mama, what's happening?" Jacob asked. "Fire! The barn! We need to get out!" She grabbed Sarah, took Elijah's hand, pushed Jacob toward the door. Outside, chaos. Men running with buckets, horses screaming in the corral, Zeke's voice shouting orders. Ruth pulled her children away from the cabin, toward the main house, toward safety. But a figure stepped out of the shadows. Garrett Cole. "Evening, Mrs. McAllister." His voice was calm, pleasant, like they were meeting at church. "Busy night." Ruth pushed her children behind her. "Get away from us." "I just want to talk," Cole smiled. "About that ledger your husband stole. I know you have it. I know it's somewhere on this ranch." "I don't know what you're talking about." "Please," Cole's smile faded. "Don't insult me. That fire? That's just a taste. A warning. Tomorrow it could be the schoolhouse. The day after, the main house." He stepped closer. "Or maybe one of your children. Accidents happen on ranches, especially to children who wander where they shouldn't." Ruth's blood turned to ice. "You touch my children, and I'll kill you myself." "Big words from a widow with nothing," Cole laughed. "Give me the ledger, Mrs. McAllister. Give it to me, and I'll disappear. You'll never see me again." "And if I don't?" "Then everyone you care about dies." Cole's eyes went flat. "Starting with your pretty little daughter." He reached toward Sarah. Ruth moved without thinking. She grabbed Cole's arm, twisted, drove her knee into his stomach. He doubled over, gasping. "Jacob, run!" Ruth screamed. "Take your brother and sister! Run to the main house! Now!" Jacob grabbed Sarah, grabbed Elijah, and ran. Cole straightened, his face twisted with rage. "You stupid!" A rifle shot cracked through the night. Cole froze. Zeke emerged from the darkness, rifle raised. "Step away from her. Now!" Cole's hands went up slowly. "This isn't your fight, Thornton." "It became my fight when you set my barn on fire." Zeke's voice was deadly calm. "And it became personal when you threatened a woman and her children on my land." "You don't know what you're getting into. The Morrison Company." "I know exactly what the Morrison Company is. A pack of thieves and murderers hiding behind legal papers." Zeke stepped closer. "And I know what you are. An errand boy. A dog sent to do dirty work." Cole's face reddened. "You can't stop this. You're one rancher in the middle of nowhere. The company has lawyers, judges, politicians, and I have proof." Cole's expression flickered. "What proof?" "The ledger.
Every name, every number, every murder your company ever covered up. Zeke smiled coldly. Did you think you were the only one who could make copies? Right now, there were letters on their way to every federal marshal in the territory, every newspaper, every honest judge we could find. You're bluffing. Try me. Cole looked from Zeke to Ruth to the men who had gathered behind them, ranch hands with rifles, watching with hard eyes. This isn't over, he said. For you it is, Zeke raised his rifle. You've got until sunrise to get off my property. If I see you again, I won't give you a warning. I'll give you a bullet. Cole's jaw tightened, but he turned, walked to his horse, mounted. The company won't forget this, he called over his shoulder. Neither will I, Zeke replied. And then Cole was gone, into the darkness, and Ruth finally let herself breathe. Later, much later, after the fire was out and the children were safe, and the ranch had settled into an uneasy quiet, Ruth found Zeke on the porch of the main house. He was sitting in the darkness, staring at nothing. You shouldn't have done that, she said quietly. Done what? Confronted him, threatened him, made yourself a target. Zeke looked at her. I've been a target before, survived a war, built this ranch from nothing. One company thug doesn't scare me. It should. These men don't fight fair, Zeke. They'll come back. With more men. More guns. Let them come. Zeke. Ruth. He stood, moved toward her. I spent 14 years building walls around myself, telling myself I didn't need anyone, didn't deserve anyone. Not after Abigail. He stopped inches from her. And then you showed up. With your 3 children and your $12 and your spine made of pure steel. And you knocked down every wall I built without even trying. Ruth's heart was pounding. I'm not. You are. Zeke took her hand. You're the bravest woman I've ever met. And I'll be damned if I let anyone hurt you. Even if it means risking everything you've built? Everything I've built means nothing if I can't protect the people I love. The word hung in the air between them. Love. Zeke. I know. His voice was rough. Wrong time. Wrong circumstances. Cole still out there. Danger on all sides. He lifted her hand to his lips, kissed her knuckles gently. But when this is over, if you're willing, I'd like to court you proper. Take our time. Do it right. Ruth felt tears sliding down her cheeks. And if I said I don't want to wait? Zeke's eyes widened. Ruth, I've spent 6 months being afraid, being careful, being practical. She stepped closer. I'm tired of waiting for the right moment. The right moment is now. Tonight, when we're both alive and together and... He kissed her. Soft at first, then deeper. And Ruth felt 14 years of his loneliness and 6 months of her fear dissolve into something new. Something that felt like hope. When they finally pulled apart, Zeke pressed his forehead against hers. That wasn't very proper. I don't care about proper. The children adore you. Jacob told me last week he wishes you were his father. Zeke's breath caught. He said that? He said you're the kind of man who stays, the kind who keeps promises. Ruth pulled back, looked into his eyes. He's right. You are. Zeke cupped her face in his hands. I want to marry you, Ruth. Not because Cole forced my hand, not because of what people might say. Because I can't imagine my life without you in it. Then marry me. Now? As soon as we can. Tomorrow, if possible. Zeke laughed. Actually laughed. You don't do anything by halves, do you? Life's too short. Ruth's voice steadied. Daniel taught me that. He died with so much left undone, so much left unsaid. I won't make that mistake.
Then tomorrow, Zeke kissed her again. We'll find a judge, make it legal, and whatever comes after, we'll face it together.
Together.
It was a promise, and unlike all the promises that had been broken before, this one felt real. This one felt like it might actually last. But even as Ruth let herself hope, she knew the truth. Cole was still out there. The Morrison Company was still hunting, and the real fight was just beginning. They were married 2 days later. Not the wedding Ruth had once dreamed of. No white dress, no church bells, no family gathered in celebration. Just a judge in Helena, Hattie Mae as witness, and 3 children who couldn't stop smiling. Do you, Ezekiel Abraham Thornton, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do. And do you, Ruth Ellen McAllister, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? Ruth looked at Zeke, at his weathered face, his steady eyes, his hands that had built a ranch and offered her shelter and fought to protect her children. I do. Then by the power vested in me by the Montana Territory, I pronounce you husband and wife. Zeke kissed her, soft and certain and full of promise. Behind them, Jacob whispered to Elijah, Does this mean he's our pa now? Zeke heard, pulled back from Ruth, knelt down to face the boys. If you'll have me. Jacob looked at Elijah. Elijah looked at Sarah, who stood silent, as always, clutching her rag doll. We'll have you, Jacob said. All of us. Zeke pulled the boys into a hug. Ruth watched, tears streaming down her face. And Sarah. Sarah stepped forward, touched Zeke's arm with her small hand, still silent, but present, choosing. It was enough. For now, it was enough. The ride back to the ranch should have been joyful, but Ruth couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. What is it? Zeke asked, noticing her tension. I don't know. Just a feeling. Cole? Maybe. Or maybe I've just learned not to trust happiness. Zeke took her hand. You can trust this. Whatever comes, you can trust this. But when they crested the hill overlooking the ranch, Ruth's worst fears materialized. Smoke, rising from the direction of the main house. No. The word tore from her throat. Zeke whipped the horses into a gallop. They arrived to chaos. Men running, women screaming, children crying. But it wasn't the main house burning. It was the schoolhouse, Ruth's schoolhouse, where she'd taught 9 children to read, where she'd built something good from nothing. Gone. Consumed by flames. Everyone out? Zeke was already off the wagon, shouting orders. Is everyone out? All clear, Thomas called back. Building was empty. Thank God. Thank God. But Ruth knew this was no accident. Cole had made his point. He could reach them anywhere. Mrs. Thornton. Ruth turned. A man she didn't recognize stood at the edge of the crowd. Young, maybe 25, with a badge pinned to his chest. Deputy Marshal Samuel Whitfield. I'm looking for Ezekiel Thornton. I'm Thornton. Zeke appeared at Ruth's side. What do you want? We received some documents, letters, from multiple sources. The deputy's expression was serious. Regarding the Morrison Mining Company. Accusations of theft, bribery, murder. Ruth's heart leapt. The copies. They'd arrived. We need to ask you some questions, Whitfield continued. Both of you. And we need to see the original ledger. You'll have full cooperation, Zeke said. But first, we need to deal with this fire. Of course. Whitfield looked at the burning schoolhouse. I assume this is related? Man named Garrett Cole, works for Morrison. He threatened Mrs. Thornton, my wife, 3 nights ago. We know about Cole. Whitfield's jaw tightened. He's wanted in California for assault and suspected murder. We've got men looking for him. Look harder, Ruth said.
Because he's not going to stop until he gets what he wants, or we're all dead. Whitfield met her eyes. That's why I'm here, ma'am, to make sure neither of those things happens. The next week was the longest of Ruth's life. Deputy Whitfield and 2 other marshals set up camp at the ranch. They interviewed everyone, examined the ledger, sent telegrams to California, Washington, everywhere Daniel's evidence reached. And slowly, piece by piece, the case against Morrison Mining Company began to build. 23 documented murders, Whitfield said one evening, spreading papers across Zeke's desk. Bribery of local officials in 4 counties. Theft totaling over $200,000. He looked up. Your husband was thorough, Mrs. Thornton. This evidence is going to bring down one of the biggest mining operations in the West. And Cole? Still looking. Whitfield's expression darkened. He's gone to ground. But he'll surface. Men like him always do. Ruth nodded, but the words did nothing to ease her fear. Every night she checked on the children 3 times. Every sound made her jump. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat. You need to sleep, Zeke said one night, finding her standing at the window again. I can't. Every time I close my eyes, I see him. Cole. Reaching for Sarah.
He's not going to hurt Sarah. He's not going to hurt any of them. You can't promise that. I can promise I'll die before I let it happen.
Ruth turned to face him. That's what I'm afraid of. Zeke pulled her close. I survived a war, Ruth. Survived building this ranch from nothing. Survived 14 years of loneliness that nearly broke me. He lifted her chin. I didn't survive all that just to lose now. Not when I finally have something worth living for. Ruth buried her face in his chest. I love you. I love you too. He kissed the top of her head. Now come to bed. Whatever tomorrow brings, we'll face it together. She let him lead her away from the window. But sleep, when it came, was filled with nightmares. The break came 3 days later. Frank McAllister rode onto the ranch at sunset, his horse lathered with sweat. I found him, Frank gasped, barely dismounting before speaking. Cole! I found him! Zeke and Ruth came running. Where? Abandoned mining camp, 15 miles north of Helena. Frank's face was pale. He's not alone. Got 4 men with him, and they're planning something. How do you know this? Frank hesitated. Because I've been following him. Since that night he came to see me. He met Ruth's eyes. I told you I wanted to help. This was the only way I knew how. Ruth stared at her brother-in-law, the man who had closed his door on her children, the man who was now risking his life to protect them. Frank, don't, he shook his head. Don't thank me. I'm not doing this for thanks. I'm doing it because Daniel was my brother, and I failed him. I failed you. I failed those children. His voice cracked. This is the only way I know to make it right. Zeke stepped forward. This mining camp. You're sure Cole's there? I'm sure. And I'm sure he's planning to come back. Heard them talking about finishing the job. Frank's jaw tightened. They mentioned the children by name, Zeke. By name. Ruth's blood went cold. When? Tomorrow night. They're waiting for the marshals to leave. Zeke turned to Thomas, who had appeared at the commotion. Get Whitfield. Now. Within the hour, a plan was forming. Whitfield would take his men to the mining camp at dawn, surround it before Cole and his crew could move. End this, once and for all. You stay here, Whitfield told Ruth. Keep the children close. We'll have men guarding the property. And if something goes wrong? It won't. But Ruth had heard those words before. From Daniel, the morning he'd left for the mine. The morning he'd never come home. I'm going with you. Everyone turned to look at Zeke. The hell you are, Ruth said. Cole threatened my family, burned my barn, destroyed Ruth's school. He's been terrorizing this ranch for weeks. Zeke's voice was steel. I'm not sitting here waiting to hear how it ends. I'm going to be there when we finish this.
Zeke.
Ruth. He took her hands.
I need you to trust me. I need you to stay here, keep the children safe, and trust me to come back.
That's what Daniel said.
I'm not Daniel. Zeke's grip tightened. I'm not chasing a dream or fighting someone else's battle. I'm protecting my family. Our family. He kissed her forehead. I'm coming home. I swear it. Ruth wanted to argue, wanted to beg him to stay, wanted to lock him in the cabin and never let him leave. But she saw the determination in his eyes, the need to see this through, and she understood. Because if their positions were reversed, she'd do exactly the same thing.
Come home to me, she whispered. Always.
They left before dawn. Ruth stood on the porch, watching Zeke ride away with Whitfield and his men, watching until they disappeared over the horizon. Then she went inside to her children. Jacob was awake, sitting at the table, his young face tight with worry. Is Pa coming back? Pa. He'd called Zeke Pa. Ruth knelt beside him.
Yes,
He's coming back. Promise? Ruth thought about all the promises that had been broken, all the people who had left, all the doors that had closed. I promise, because sometimes faith was all you had left. The morning passed slowly. Ruth kept the children close, taught them lessons to pass the time, played games she didn't feel like playing, smiled when she wanted to scream. Hattie Mae stayed with them, her steady presence a comfort. He'll be fine, the older woman said. Zeke survived worse than some company thugs. I know. Then stop looking at that door like it's going to burst open any second. Ruth forced herself to look away, but her ears stayed tuned to every sound, every hoofbeat, every voice in the distance. Please, please let him come home. Noon came and went, then 1 o'clock, 2, 3. Ruth's nerves were stretched so tight she thought she might shatter. Mama! She looked down. Sarah was standing beside her, looking up with those big brown eyes that hadn't spoken in 6 months. What is it, sweetheart? Sarah held out her hand. In it was a small wildflower, purple, delicate, the kind that grew near the creek. Ruth took it, confused. Thank you, Sarah. It's beautiful. Sarah nodded, then did something she hadn't done since Daniel died. She climbed into Ruth's lap, wrapped her thin arms around Ruth's neck, and held on tight. Ruth's eyes filled with tears. Oh, sweetheart. She held her daughter close, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the small heart beat against her own. Sarah still didn't speak, but for the first time in 6 months, she was reaching out instead of withdrawing. It was something. It was everything. The sound of hoofbeats shattered the moment. Ruth was on her feet instantly, heart pounding, rushing to the window. Riders, coming fast, too fast. Hattie Mae! I see them, Ruth counted. 1, 2, 3. Only 3 riders. They'd left with 8. No. No, no, no. She was out the door before she could think, running toward the approaching horses, searching desperately for Zeke's familiar form. The first rider was Thomas. His face was grim, his shirt bloodied. The second was one of Whitfield's deputies. The third was Zeke, slumped over his saddle, not moving. Zeke! Ruth reached him as Thomas pulled the horse to a stop. He's alive, Thomas said quickly. Shot in the shoulder, lost a lot of blood, but he's alive. Alive. He was alive. Ruth's knees buckled. Help me get him inside, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Now. They carried Zeke into the main house, laid him on the bed. Ruth cut away his shirt, exposed the wound. The bullet had gone clean through. No fragments, no shattered bone. Just torn muscle and too much blood.
I need hot water, she ordered. Clean cloths. Whiskey if we have it. Ruth, Thomas started. Now! He went. Ruth turned back to Zeke.
His face was pale, his breathing shallow, but his eyes were open, looking at her.
Told you, he rasped. Coming home.
Ruth laughed through her tears. You idiot! You absolute idiot!
Cole's dead.
Ruth's hands stilled. What?
Shot him myself, when he tried to run.
Zeke's voice was fading.
It's over, Ruth. It's finally over. His eyes closed.
Ruth's heart stopped. Zeke? Zeke!
He's unconscious, Thomas said, returning with supplies. Not dead, just unconscious.
Ruth pressed her hand to Zeke's chest, felt it rise, fall, rise again. Alive. Still alive. Then let's keep him that way. The next 3 days were a blur of fever and fear. Zeke's wound became infected. His temperature spiked. He thrashed in his sleep, calling out names Ruth didn't recognize. Comrades from the war, she realized. Men he'd watched die. Fight, she whispered, holding his burning hand. You promised you'd come home. You're home now. Don't you dare leave. The doctor came from Helena, examined the wound, drained the infection, left instructions and little hope. It's in God's hands now, he said. Ruth had never been much for praying, but that night she got on her knees beside Zeke's bed and begged whatever power might be listening to spare him. I've lost too much already. My husband, my home, my sense of safety. Her voice broke. Please don't take him too. Please. I'll do anything. Just let him live. The children came one by one to say goodnight. Jacob stood at the bedside, jaw tight, fighting tears he was too proud to shed. You gotta wake up, he said to Zeke's still form. You promised you'd teach me to rope properly. You can't break a promise. Elijah brought his favorite rock, a piece of quartz he'd found near the creek, and placed it on Zeke's pillow. For luck, he explained. It always brings me luck. And Sarah. Sarah climbed onto the bed, lay down beside Zeke, put her small hand on his chest, and spoke. Don't die. 2 words, the first word she'd said in 6 months. Ruth's heart shattered and reformed in the same instant. Sarah. Don't die, Sarah said again, louder this time. Please, don't die. I don't want another papa to die. Ruth pulled her daughter close, crying so hard she couldn't breathe. He won't, sweetheart. He's going to be okay. He's going to be okay. She said it like a prayer, like a promise, like the only truth that mattered. And somehow, miraculously, it became true. The fever broke on the 4th morning. Ruth woke from a restless doze to find Zeke watching her, his eyes clear, his color better, his hand reaching for hers. Hey! Ruth burst into tears. Don't you ever do that to me again. Do what? Get shot? He tried to smile. Wasn't planning on making it a habit. You almost died. Almost doesn't count. He squeezed her hand. I'm here. I'm alive. And I'm not going anywhere. Ruth leaned down, pressed her forehead to his. Sarah spoke. Zeke went still. What? While you were unconscious, she came in and told you not to die. Ruth's voice trembled. First words in 6 months. She spoke for you, Zeke. His eyes glistened. That little girl. She loves you. They all do. Ruth pulled back, looked at him. We all do. I know. He reached up, touched her face. I love you too. All of you.
more than I ever thought I could love anything again." Ruth kissed him, gentle, careful of his wound, but full of everything she felt: relief, love, hope, hope most of all. Because they'd survived, all of them, through fire and fear and the worst that evil men could do. And they were still standing, still together, still a family. The investigation wrapped up over the following weeks. Deputy Whitfield returned with reports and justice. The Morrison Mining Company was finished, their executives arrested, their assets seized, their crimes exposed in newspapers across the territory. 23 families would finally know the truth about their lost husbands and fathers. Daniel McAllister among them. "Your husband was a hero, Mrs. Thornton," Whitfield said before he left. "What he did, gathering that evidence, hiding it, making sure it survived, that took courage. Real courage." Ruth accepted the words, but they didn't bring Daniel back. Nothing would. Still, there was comfort in knowing his death hadn't been meaningless. That the truth he'd died for had finally come to light. That the men who killed him would pay. Frank came to the ranch one last time. He stood awkwardly in the doorway, hat in hands, looking at Ruth with eyes full of regret. "I'm leaving Helena," he said. "Going back east. Nothing keeping me here now." Ruth nodded. "Thank you. For what you did. Following Cole. Risking yourself." "Doesn't make up for what I did before." "No, it doesn't." Ruth paused. "But it's a start." Frank's eyes glistened. "Daniel would have been proud of you, Ruth. The way you fought. The way you protected those children. The way you built a new life from nothing. I had help. You had courage." Frank shook his head. "That was all you." He turned to leave, then stopped. "Tell the children," his voice cracked. "Tell them their uncle is sorry. For everything." "I'll tell them." And she did. Because forgiveness was a journey, not a destination. And sometimes the first step was simply acknowledging the wound. October painted the ranch in shades of gold and crimson. The barn had been rebuilt. The schoolhouse, too, bigger and better than before. And everywhere Ruth looked, she saw evidence of the life she'd built, the life she'd fought for, the life she'd earned. "Mama!" Elijah came running across the yard. "Sarah's talking. She won't stop talking." Ruth laughed. It was true. Once Sarah had started speaking, she seemed determined to make up for 6 months of silence. She chattered constantly, asking questions, telling stories, singing songs she'd kept locked inside. "That's wonderful, sweetheart." "She's annoying," Elijah said, but he was smiling. Ruth pulled him close, kissed the top of his head. "That's what sisters are for." Inside the main house, she found Zeke at his desk. His shoulder was still stiff, the wounds still healing, but he was back to work, back to running the ranch, back to being the man she'd fallen in love with. "Hey," she came up behind him, wrapped her arms around his neck. "Busy?" "Paperwork. Hate it." He turned, pulled her onto his lap. "Much rather be doing this." "Zeke," she laughed. "The children might see." "Let them. They should know their parents love each other." Their parents. The words still sent warmth through Ruth's chest. "I have something to tell you," she said. "Good something or bad something?" Ruth took his hand, placed it on her stomach. "Good something, I think." Zeke went very still. "Ruth, are you—" "I'm not certain yet, but I think so. The signs are there." His face went through a dozen emotions in seconds. Shock, wonder, fear, joy. "A baby?" "Maybe. Probably." "Our baby?" "Unless you know something I don't." He laughed, pulled her close, buried his face in her neck. "I never thought—" His voice was rough.
After Abigail, I never thought I'd have this chance again. Are you happy? Happy doesn't begin to cover it. He pulled back, looked at her with eyes full of tears. Ruth, I love you. I love the children. And if there's another one coming... He stopped, laughed again. I'm going to be a father. Again, after 14 years. Scared? Terrified, he grinned. But the good kind of terrified. The kind that comes with something worth being scared for. Ruth kissed him. We should tell the children. Tonight, at supper. Make it official. Ruth nodded, but didn't move from his lap. Zeke? Thank you. For what? For seeing me that day in Helena. For helping us when you had no reason to. For giving us a home when everyone else turned away. Zeke cupped her face in his hands. You gave me more than I gave you. You gave me a family, a purpose, a reason to stop just existing and start living again. He kissed her forehead. We saved each other, Ruth. That's how it works. That's how it's supposed to work. Ruth leaned into him, feeling his heartbeat against her cheek. Strong, steady, alive. They'd lost so much to get here, but they'd found something too. Something worth fighting for. Something worth living for. Something that felt, finally, like home. The news spread through the ranch like wildfire. Hattie Mae cried actual tears. The woman who Ruth had never seen show anything softer than grudging approval. A baby, Hattie Mae kept saying. After all this time. After everything. Thomas shook Zeke's hand and told him it was about damn time something good happened around here. The Caldwell brothers started a betting pool on whether it would be a boy or a girl. And the children. Jacob's reaction surprised Ruth most of all. So this baby, he said slowly, working through the implications, it'll be Mr. Thornton's real child. Blood child. Ruth knelt down to face her son. Yes, but Jacob, that doesn't change anything about you and your brother and sister. I know. Jacob's voice was quiet. I just want to make sure the baby knows, too, that we're all family. All of us. Zeke stepped forward. Come here, son. Jacob went. Zeke put his hands on the boy's shoulders, looked him straight in the eyes. When I married your mother, I married all of you. You, Elijah, Sarah. You became my children that day, not because of blood, but because of choice. He paused. This baby won't change that. Won't change how I feel about you. Won't change your place in this family. Promise? I swear it. Zeke pulled Jacob into a hug. You're my son, Jacob. Nothing will ever change that. Ruth watched with tears streaming down her face. This man, this quiet, steady, stubborn man. He'd given her children something she'd feared they'd never have again. A father who stayed. November brought the first real cold of winter. Ruth's pregnancy progressed without complication, though the morning sickness hit harder than she remembered from before. You're getting old, Hattie Mae teased. Body don't bounce back like it used to. Thank you for that encouragement. Anytime. But beneath the teasing, Hattie Mae watched Ruth like a hawk. Made sure she ate. Made sure she rested. Made sure she didn't lift anything heavier than a coffee cup. You're not my mother, Ruth complained one afternoon. No, I ain't. Your mother would probably let you work yourself to death out of politeness. Hattie Mae's eyes were sharp. I ain't polite. Ruth laughed to spite herself. No, you're not. And you love me anyway. God help me, I do. The school had reopened with the new building. Ruth taught 3 mornings a week now instead of all day. Zeke had insisted, worried about her health, worried about the baby. I'm pregnant, not dying, Ruth had argued. Humor me."
She'd humored him, and found, to her surprise, that she didn't mind the lighter schedule. It gave her more time with the children, more time with Zeke, more time to simply exist without the constant pressure of proving herself. She'd spent so long fighting just to survive. Learning to rest felt almost revolutionary. The first snow fell on the second week of December. Ruth stood at the window, watching the white blanket cover the ranch, remembering another winter. A year ago, she'd been standing outside a general store in Helena with $12 and 3 frightened children. A year ago, she'd been begging at Frank's door, watching it stay closed. A year ago, she'd been certain her life was over.
"What are you thinking about?" Zeke came up behind her, wrapped his arms around her expanding middle.
Last year, how different everything was.
Different bad? Different terrifying. Ruth leaned back against him.
I was so scared, Zeke, so certain that nothing good could ever happen again.
And now? She turned in his arms, looked up at his face. Now I have a husband who loves me, children who are thriving, a baby on the way, a home that no one can take from me. She touched his cheek. Now I have everything I stopped believing I deserved. Zeke kissed her forehead. You deserve more. You deserve all of it and more. So do you. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the snow fall. Ruth thought about Abigail, the wife Zeke had lost 14 years ago, the baby who'd never taken a breath. She thought about Daniel, the husband she'd lost 6 months before arriving at this ranch, the man who'd died trying to do the right thing.
2 ghosts that would always be part of their story. But ghost didn't have to mean grief. Sometimes ghosts meant gratitude. Gratitude for the love that had come before. Gratitude for the paths that had led them here. Gratitude for the second chances that shouldn't have been possible, but somehow were.
Zeke? Do you think they'd be happy, Abigail and Daniel, if they could see us now?
Zeke was quiet for a long moment. I think Abigail would be glad I stopped being a damn fool and let myself love again. His voice was rough. And I think Daniel would be glad his family is safe, that his children have a good life, that his sacrifice wasn't for nothing.
I hope so.
I know so. Zeke tightened his arms around her. Love doesn't disappear when someone dies, Ruth. It just changes form, becomes part of who we are, part of how we love the next person.
So Daniel's part of us?
And Abigail too. Zeke pressed his lips to her hair. We carry them forward, in our memories, in our choices, in the love we give our children. Ruth felt tears slip down her cheeks.
I love you, Ezekiel Thornton.
I love you too, Ruth Thornton. Ruth Thornton. She still wasn't used to the name, but she was learning to love it. Christmas arrived with all the chaos and joy that children could create. The main house was transformed, garlands everywhere, handmade ornaments hanging from every available surface, the smell of Hattie Mae's gingerbread filling every room. Ruth watched her children tear into their presents with a joy that made her chest ache. Jacob got a new saddle, his own saddle, sized just for him. He stared at it like it was made of gold.
This is mine? Really mine?
Really yours, Zeke confirmed. You've earned it. Working hard, taking care of your responsibilities, that saddle is proof you're becoming a man. Jacob threw his arms around Zeke, breaking every rule of dignity he'd set for himself.
Thank you, Pa. Thank you.
Elijah got a set of carving tools. He'd been fascinated with Thomas's whittling, and now he had the means to learn. You'll cut yourself, Ruth warned. Probably, Elijah agreed cheerfully, but then I'll learn not to. Sarah got a music box that played a tune Ruth remembered from her own childhood. The little girl wound it over and over, listening with rapt attention, her eyes bright with a joy that had been missing for so long.
"Play it again, Mama."
3 months ago, those words would have been impossible. Now they were just Tuesday.
"As many times as you want, sweetheart."
The ranch families gathered for Christmas dinner. Tables pushed together, chairs borrowed from every building on the property, enough food to feed an army. Ruth looked around at the faces assembled. The Hendersons, the Cartwrights, the Dawsons, Thomas and his wife Martha, the Caldwell brothers, who had no family of their own but had been adopted by the ranch years ago. Hattie Mae, presiding over her kitchen like a general commanding troops. And at the head of the table, Zeke, her husband, the father of her children, the man who had given her everything when she had nothing. "Speech," someone called. "The boss needs to make a speech." Zeke stood, looking uncomfortable with the attention, but willing to endure it. "I ain't much for speeches, never have been, but I've got a few things to say, so bear with me." He looked around the room at the faces of people who had become family in every way that mattered. 2 years ago, I was the man with a ranch and nothing else. I'd spent 14 years building walls around myself, convincing myself that work was enough, that land was enough, that I didn't need anything more than what I had. His eyes found Ruth's. Then a woman showed up, with 3 children and $12 and more courage than sense. And she knocked down every wall I'd built without even trying, just by being herself, just by working hard and loving her children and refusing to give up no matter what life threw at her. Ruth felt tears prick her eyes. I used to think second chances were something you got once, and then they were gone. But I've learned different. Second chances are something you build, day by day, choice by choice. They ain't given to you, they're earned. He raised his glass. And they're worth every bit of fear and doubt and hard work it takes to get them. He looked at Ruth. To family. Not the one we're born into, but the one we choose. The one we fight for. The one we build together, brick by brick, promise by promise, until it's stronger than anything that tries to tear it down. To family, the room echoed. Ruth raised her glass with everyone else, too moved to speak. Zeke sat down and conversations resumed. Laughter filled the room. Children chased each other around the tables, and Ruth sat in the middle of all of it, one hand resting on her growing belly, the other reaching for Zeke's beneath the table. He took it, squeezed. "Happy?" he asked quietly. "More than I ever thought possible." "Good." He lifted her hand to his lips, kissed her knuckles. "Because that's all I want, for the rest of my life. That's all I want." January brought the worst storm Ruth had ever seen. 3 days of howling wind and driving snow that buried the ranch so deep even the horses couldn't move. Everyone huddled in the main house, sharing body heat and stories and whatever food Hattie Mae could make stretch. "Tell us about the war, Mr. Thornton," Daniel Henderson asked. The boy had grown to idolize Zeke over the past months. Zeke was quiet for a moment. "The war wasn't something to tell stories about, son. It was something to survive." "But you were brave, weren't you? Pa says you were brave." "I was young." Zeke's voice was careful. "Young and stupid and convinced I knew what was right. War cured me of that, real quick." "What do you mean?" Zeke looked at the faces around him. Children, mostly. Young and innocent and hungry for adventure stories. "I mean, I learned that bravery isn't about not being scared. It's about being scared and doing what needs doing anyway." He paused. "And I learned that the real heroes weren't the ones who killed the most enemies. They were the ones who saved the most friends. He looked at Thomas, who had lost his arm in the same war. Your pa knows what I mean. Don't you, Thomas? Thomas nodded slowly. I do. Lost my arm saving a man who would have died otherwise. Never regretted it. Not once. But it must have been terrible, Daniel persisted. The fighting? The dying? It was. Zeke's voice went soft. It was the worst thing I've ever lived through. And it taught me that life is precious. Every single day of it. Too precious to waste on hate or grudges or fear. He put his hand on Ruth's belly. That's why I fought so hard to protect this family. Because I know what it costs to lose people. And I know what it means to find them again. The room was quiet. Then Sarah climbed into Zeke's lap. I love you, Papa. Zeke's eyes glistened. I love you too, little one. More than you'll ever know. The storm broke on the fourth day. Ruth woke to silence. The absence of wind felt almost strange after so many hours of howling. She was alone in bed. Zeke was already up, probably checking on the livestock. She rose slowly, her belly now too large for quick movements, and made her way to the window. The world was white, clean, beautiful in a way that almost hurt. And there, in the yard below, was Zeke, with all 3 children, building something in the snow. Ruth watched as Jacob packed snow onto what was clearly becoming a fort, as Elijah tried to roll a snowball bigger than himself, as Sarah threw handfuls of white powder at everyone within reach, laughing, actually laughing with pure, childish joy. And Zeke was in the middle of all of it, helping, playing, being a father in every way that mattered. Ruth pressed her hand to her heart, overwhelmed by a love so fierce it almost frightened her. This man, this family, this life. It was more than she'd ever dared hope for, and it was hers. The baby came in early March. Ruth knew something was wrong from the first contraction. Get Zeke, she gasped to Hattie Mae. Get him now. The labor was hard, harder than any of her previous 3. The baby was positioned wrong, the midwife said, taking too long, too much blood. Ruth drifted in and out of awareness, hearing voices that seemed far away. She's losing too much blood. Keep her awake. Don't let her sleep. Where's Mr. Thornton? And then Zeke's voice, cutting through the fog. Ruth, look at me. She forced her eyes open. His face was pale, terrified, but his voice was steady. You stay with me, you hear? You don't get to leave. Not now. Not after everything we've survived. Tired, she whispered. I know you're tired. But you fight. That's what you do. That's who you are. His hand gripped hers so tight it almost hurt. You're the strongest woman I've ever known. You survived losing your husband, survived being turned away by your own family, survived everything Cole and Morrison threw at you. His voice cracked. You don't get to give up now. Not when we're so close. Not when our baby needs you. When our children need you. When I need you. Ruth focused on his eyes, on the love in them, on the fear and the hope and the desperate pleading. Promise me, Zeke whispered. Promise me you'll fight. Promise, she breathed. And then another contraction hit, and Ruth screamed, and everything became pain and pressure and the primal need to push. That's it, the midwife encouraged. Almost there. One more. Ruth pushed with everything she had left, and then a cry, thin and reedy and absolutely perfect. It's a girl, the midwife announced. A healthy baby girl. Ruth collapsed against the pillows, too exhausted to move. Zeke was crying, actually crying, tears streaming down his face as the midwife placed their daughter in his arms. "A girl," he said, wonder in his voice. "We have a daughter." "Let me see her." Ruth's voice was barely a whisper. "Please." Zeke placed the baby in her arms. She was perfect, tiny and red-faced and screaming with the indignation of being born. But perfect. Ruth counted fingers, counted toes, touched the wisp of dark hair on the small head. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "We've been waiting for you." The baby's cries softened. Her eyes opened, dark like Zeke's, Ruth thought, though it was too early to tell. "She needs a name," Zeke said, sitting beside them on the bed. Ruth had been thinking about this for months.
"Hope," she said. "I want to call her Hope."
Zeke's breath caught. "Hope?"
"Because that's what you gave me, what you gave all of us."
Ruth looked at him with eyes full of tears.
"The courage to hope again, when I'd forgotten how."
Zeke touched the baby's cheek with one gentle finger. "Hope Thornton," he tried it out. "It's perfect. She's perfect." He leaned down, kissed Ruth's forehead. "You're perfect. All of you. My whole family." The children came in one by one to meet their sister. Jacob approached with the seriousness of an oldest brother accepting responsibility.
"She's so small."
"You were that small once," Ruth reminded him.
"I don't believe it."
"It's true," Ruth smiled. "You grew, so will she. And she'll need her big brothers and sister to help her." "I'll protect her," Jacob's voice was fierce. "I'll protect her from everything." "I know you will." Elijah was fascinated. "She looks like a potato." "Elijah!" "A cute potato," he amended.
"Can I hold her?" "When you're sitting down, and gentle." He sat, held his arms out. Ruth placed Hope in them with infinite care. "Hi, Hope," Elijah whispered. "I'm your brother. I'm going to teach you to find the best rocks."
And Sarah. Sarah climbed onto the bed beside Ruth, looked at the baby with solemn eyes.
"She's my sister?" "Yes, sweetheart, your baby sister."
Sarah reached out, touched Hope's tiny hand. Hope's fingers curled around Sarah's, holding on.
"I'll take care of her," Sarah said quietly, "like you took care of me, when I couldn't talk, when I was scared."
Ruth pulled Sarah close with her free arm.
"You're such a brave girl, Sarah. Such a good sister." "I wasn't brave before. I was scared." "Being scared doesn't mean you're not brave."
Ruth kissed her daughter's hair.
"It means you're human. Brave is what happens when you're scared, but you keep going anyway."
Sarah thought about this.
"Like you, Mama?" "Like all of us."
That night, after the children were asleep and the midwife had gone, Ruth lay in bed with Hope in her arms and Zeke beside her.
"I almost lost you," Zeke said quietly. "For a moment there, I thought, but you didn't, but I could have." Ruth turned her head to look at him. I know how close it was." She reached for his hand. "But Zeke, I made a promise. To you, to the children, to myself. And I don't break promises. Neither do I." He intertwined his fingers with hers. "So here's another one. I promise to love you, protect you, stand beside you through whatever comes, for the rest of my life." "And I promise the same." Ruth squeezed his hand. "Through everything, until the very end." They lay in comfortable silence, watching their daughter sleep. "What do you think they'd say?" Zeke asked. "Abigail and Daniel, if they could see us now." Ruth thought about it. "I think they'd say we found our way. Eventually. Through all the pain and loss and wrong turns."
She paused. "I think they'd say we earned this."
"We did. Both of us."
"Yes."
Ruth felt peace settle over her like a warm blanket.
We did.
Spring arrived early that year. Ruth recovered slowly but surely. Hope grew stronger every day, her cries lusty, her appetite enormous. The ranch came back to life after the long winter. Cattle birthing, fields planting, the endless cycle of work that kept everyone busy from dawn to dusk. But somehow, despite the chaos, Ruth found moments of pure joy. Watching Zeke teach Jacob to ride properly, listening to Elijah's proud reports of his carving progress, seeing Sarah blossom, her voice growing stronger every day, holding hope in the quiet hours, marveling at the miracle of new life. "You look happy," Hattie Mae observed one afternoon. Ruth looked up from the bread she was kneading. "I am happy." "Good. You've earned it." "So have you." Ruth paused her work. "Hattie Mae, I never properly thanked you for everything you've done."
For this family. Don't need thanks. Maybe not, but you deserve it. Ruth met the older woman's eyes. You took us in when we were strangers, treated us like family when we had none, stood by us through everything. Hattie Mae's expression softened. "You know why I helped you? That first morning." "Why?" "Because I saw myself." Hattie Mae's voice was quiet. "I saw a mother fighting for her children, a woman alone, doing whatever it took to keep them safe. I was that woman once, long time ago. What happened?" "I lost them." Hattie Mae's eyes glistened. "My children, sold away from me before the war. Never saw them again." Ruth's heart broke. "Hattie Mae, don't." The older woman held up her hand. "Don't pity me. I've had enough pity to last a lifetime. What I want is what I have now. A family that chose me. Children that call me Grandma. A place where I belong." She smiled. "You gave me that, Ruth. You and Zeke and those children. You gave me something I thought I'd never have again." Ruth abandoned her bread, crossed the kitchen, and hugged Hattie Mae tight.
"Your family," she whispered. "Real family. And nothing will ever change that."
Hattie Mae hugged her back. "I know, child. I know." Summer brought a visitor Ruth never expected. She was in the schoolhouse, teaching the younger children their letters, when the door opened. A woman stood in the doorway, older than Ruth, perhaps 50, with gray-streaked hair and tired eyes. "Mrs. Thornton? Ruth Thornton?" "Yes." "My name is Elizabeth Morrison." The woman stepped inside. "I believe my husband's company killed your first husband." Ruth went cold. "Mrs. Morrison, please." Elizabeth held up her hand. "Let me speak. I've come a long way." She sat in one of the children's chairs, looking small and worn. "My husband is in prison. You know that. Because of the evidence your Daniel gathered.
Because of what you and your husband did to expose the truth.
"Yes."
"I came to thank you." Ruth stared at her. "Thank me?" "My husband was a monster." Elizabeth's voice was flat. "I didn't know it, didn't want to know it. But the truth was there all along, and I closed my eyes." She looked at Ruth with something like shame. "Those 23 men, their families. I could have stopped it. If I'd been brave enough to look, brave enough to act." "Mrs. Morrison, you can't blame yourself for what your husband did." "Can't I?" Elizabeth smiled bitterly. "I lived in that house, ate at that table, slept in that bed. I knew something was wrong. I just chose not to see it." She stood. "I've sold the company, what was left of it. I'm using the money to compensate the families, the widows, the children who lost fathers." She reached into her bag, pulled out an envelope. "This is for you, for Daniel's children. It won't bring him back, but it might help." Ruth took the envelope with numb fingers. "Mrs. Morrison,
I don't know what to say. Say you'll take it. Say you'll use it to build something good. Elizabeth moved toward the door. Say that Daniel's sacrifice meant something. It did. Ruth's voice was thick. It meant everything. Elizabeth nodded once, then walked out. Ruth stood alone in the schoolhouse, holding an envelope full of blood money. But also, she realized, holding something else. Closure. The final chapter of Daniel's story, finally written. She opened the envelope, counted the bills inside. $5,000. More money than Ruth had ever seen in her life. She thought about what Daniel would want her to do with it. And she knew. That evening, she told Zeke about Elizabeth Morrison's visit. $5,000, he said slowly. That's a lot of money. I want to build a real school. Ruth's voice was excited. Not a converted storage shed. A proper building with real desks and real books. Ruth took Zeke's hands. I want their sacrifice to mean something, Zeke. I want children for generations to learn in a building that exists because good men died trying to expose evil. Zeke was quiet for a moment. You're an extraordinary woman, Ruth Thornton. I'm a woman who is loved by an extraordinary man. 2 of them, actually. She squeezed his hands. And I want to honor both. Then that's what we'll do. Zeke pulled her close. We'll build the best damn school in Montana Territory, and we'll make sure everyone knows why. The school was completed in late autumn. A proper building with glass windows and a real blackboard. Desks for 20 students. A small library funded by donations from families across the territory who had heard the story. A plaque hung over the door. The McAllister School. In memory of Daniel McAllister and the men of Morrison Mine who died for truth and justice. Ruth stood before it on dedication day, Zeke beside her, their children around them. The whole community had gathered, ranch families, townspeople from Helena, even Deputy Marshal Whitfield, who had made a special trip. This school exists because of sacrifice, Ruth said, her voice carrying in the crisp autumn air. My husband Daniel died trying to expose a terrible wrong. 23 other men died because evil men valued profit over human life. She paused. But their deaths weren't meaningless. Because of what Daniel found, those evil men faced justice. Because of his courage, families received truth instead of lies. She looked at her children, at Jacob, who carried himself like a young man now, at Elijah, who had finally mastered his carving knife, at Sarah, who spoke clearly and confidently and had become the most talkative child on the ranch, at Hope, asleep in Zeke's arms. This school is my promise to them, Ruth continued, that their father's sacrifice will never be forgotten, that every child who learns here will know that truth matters, that courage matters, that doing the right thing matters, even when it costs everything. She took a breath. And this school is my promise to all of you, that I will spend the rest of my life teaching children that they can make a difference, that one person standing up for what's right can change the world. She stepped back. Zeke stepped forward, still holding Hope. My wife said most of what needs saying, he began. But I've got one thing to add. He looked at Ruth with so much love it almost hurt to witness. 14 years ago, I lost my wife and child. I spent the next decade convinced I'd never feel anything again, that I didn't deserve to feel anything again. His voice roughened. Then Ruth walked into my life, showed me that second chances are real, that love doesn't run out, that family isn't something you're born into, it's something you build. He looked at the school, at the plaque, at the gathered community. This building is proof of that. Built on sacrifice, yes, but also built on hope, on the belief that something good can come from something terrible.
He shifted hope in his arms. That's what I want every child who learns here to understand. That darkness doesn't win. That evil doesn't have the last word. That as long as there are people willing to fight for what's right, there's always hope. He looked at Ruth. Always. The school opened the following week. Ruth taught there every day, watching children learn to read and write and think for themselves, watching them become the future. Years passed. Jacob grew into a man, eventually taking over management of the ranch's northern pastures. He married a schoolteacher from Helena, and Ruth cried at the wedding. Elijah became an artist, his carvings sold in galleries as far away as San Francisco. He never married, but he never seemed lonely either. He had his work, his family, and a succession of dogs that followed him everywhere. Sarah became a teacher herself, taking over the McAllister School when Ruth finally retired. She had a gift for reaching children who wouldn't speak, children who were lost in grief or fear. She understood them in a way no one else could. And Hope. Hope Thornton grew into the spitting image of her mother, with her father's stubborn jaw and her own fierce spirit. She became a lawyer, one of the first women admitted to the Montana bar, fighting for the same justice her namesake represented. Ruth and Zeke watched it all from the ranch that had become their entire world. They grew old together, side by side, exactly as they'd promised. On their 20th anniversary, they sat on the porch of the main house, watching the sunset over land that had been theirs for 2 decades. "Remember that day in Helena?" Zeke asked, his voice slower now, but still strong. "When I first saw you outside the general store? I remember being certain you were going to rob us." Zeke laughed. "You looked at me like I was a rattlesnake. You were a strange man offering an isolated cabin. What was I supposed to think?" "Fair enough." He reached for her hand, still reached for it after 20 years. "But you came anyway. I didn't have a choice." "You always have a choice, Ruth. You chose to trust me. That was the bravest thing anyone ever did for me." Ruth leaned against his shoulder. "I was so scared," she admitted, so certain it was all going to fall apart. But it didn't. No, it didn't. They watched the last light fade from the sky. "What do you think would have happened?" Ruth asked. "If Frank had opened his door that day? If he'd taken us in like Daniel asked?" "I try not to think about that." "Why?" "Because then I wouldn't have you." Zeke's grip tightened on her hand. "I wouldn't have Jacob and Elijah and Sarah. Wouldn't have hope. Wouldn't have any of it." He turned to look at her. "Frank closing that door was the best thing that ever happened to me, because it brought you to my door instead." Ruth felt tears prick her eyes. "I love you, Ezekiel Thornton. Every stubborn, steady, wonderful inch of you." "I love you too, Ruth Thornton." He kissed her forehead. "Every brave, beautiful, unbreakable inch of you." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars came out. 20 years of marriage, 4 children raised, countless storms weathered, and still, the same 2 people who had found each other on the worst day of Ruth's life. The same 2 people who had chosen, again and again, to build something together. Ruth closed her eyes, feeling the peace of absolute certainty settle over her. She had walked 400 miles to find a door that would open. She had found something better. A man who tore down walls to let her in. A family built on choice instead of blood. A life earned through courage and love and the stubborn refusal to give up. She had found her way home, and she was never letting go.